April 19th marked the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. If we as a province and as a nation want to know where we are going, it is important to know where we have been. Vimy Ridge is a part of where we have been. Vimy Ridge is one of those tragic events in our Canadian history that serves as a signpost for our future provincial, national, and global journey. We must never allow tragic events like Vimy Ridge, of the Second World War, and yes, the troubling chaos of our current world, to be erased from the minds of future generations. These events must serve as a constant reminder that when government leaders stop talking, people start dying. Lest we forget.
Ministerial statements.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 100 years ago, on April 9th, 1917, a new word entered the language of Canadians. That word is Vimy. The Battle of Vimy Ridge, the capture of a German stronghold near Vimy, France, cost Canadians dearly. 3,598 lives lost and 7,000 wounded. Even still, Vimy Ridge was a bright spot in a war that had few of them. The numbers of dead and injured, unimaginable as they are, were far fewer than in other battles, including previous attempts at taking Vimy Ridge. The battle on Easter Monday, 1917, brought together all 4 Canadian divisions in the war for the first time. The force that launched the attack at Vimy reflected the country. There were people from across the nation. There were immigrants and Canadians of many ethnic backgrounds. Many, such as Indigenous Canadians and Asian Canadians, were fighting for their country at Vimy despite the fact that their country did not fully recognize their rights. Albertans joined the war effort in great numbers, to a greater percentage than any other province. Some 45,000 Albertans served overseas. There were Albertans at Vimy, such as Lance Corporal Henry Ducky Norwest, a Métis marksman with Calgary's 50th Battalion, who was awarded the military medal for his actions at Vimy Ridge, or Lieutenant Joseph Stauffer, also with the 50th Battalion, who was a member of this very assembly when he died at Vimy trying to take Hill 145. He was buried where he fell. While death was, as always, a feature of war at Vimy Ridge, many other things about the battle were different. In an embrace of new state-of-the-art techniques, soldiers received training and rehearsed on a life-size mock-up of the battlefield. Instead of being thrown blindly into the maelstrom, they were each assigned roles, their movements planned to the minute. This made all the difference as the fighting went according to plan. Instead of the grinding, wearying months of the Battle of the Somme or Passchendaele, the main battle at Vimy Ridge was over in a day. Vimy Ridge was not the only Canadian victory of the war, but it captured the imagination of the public, and it seemed to say that Canada at last could stand on its own. It helped give Canada a seat at the table at war's end and loosened the colonial bonds. Looking back at the First World War, we are struck by the folly that caused it and the mind-boggling tragedy that defined it. We can be forgiven for thinking that there is nothing to celebrate about the war, but we cannot forget it. To forget it would be to forget the major historical events in the lives of our grandparents or great-grandparents. It would be to forget the mothers and fathers, siblings and relatives, spouses and children of those gone to war. A whole society of Canadians who lived for years under the pain of separation and, all too often, bore the deafening silence of loss to the end of their days. It would be to forget some 3,000 Canadian women who served as nurses in overseas hospitals or here at home, who bravely shouldered the burden of misery as the injured and the dying were delivered to their hands for aid and comfort. And it would be to forget the tens of thousands of young men, many hardly more than boys, the pride and hope of their families who joined the war effort out of patriotic duty and a sense of adventure, and who found themselves mired in the quicksand of history. Mr. Speaker, today the soaring marble monument at Vimy Ridge stands at the site of a decisive victory. Let us not forget that it is dedicated to 11,285 Canadians who died in the First World War and have no known grave. April 9th, 2017 has been declared the Battle of Vimy Ridge Day in Alberta. Today, Mr. Speaker, we continue to remember them and all who serve today. Thank you.
The Leader of the Official Opposition.
Both my son and my father served in the Canadian Corps, and 100 years ago, the war to end all wars came at a great cost for Canadians. Over 61,000 lives were lost, 172,000 Canadian wounded. The fields of Belgium and France stained with the blood of young Canadians serving their country and their neighbors out of a profound sense of duty. There were many tragedies during the war, but there is a battle that created one of the greatest moments in our country's history. It became the founding battle of our nation. And I had the chance 5 years ago to visit that sacred ground, Vimy Ridge. No one else could capture the ridge. Canada, still under the authority of the British Empire, was charged with the task. As Brigadier General Alexander Ross said about the day, and I quote, "It was Canada from the Atlantic to the Pacific on parade. I thought then, and I think today, that in those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation." It began early morning on a cold Easter Monday with Canada's 4 divisions, 100,000 strong, united for the very first time. The Canadians pounded the German lines through creeping barrage with the infantry attacking above and under the trenches and in tunnels. After 4 days of fighting and more than 10,000 dead or wounded, Canada took the ridge. It brought out great stories of heroism and self-sacrifice. 4 of our soldiers that day won the very highest award for bravery, the Victoria Cross. These men fought and died for our freedoms and brought our country one step closer to putting an end to this war. Marked in the halls of remembrance and tombstones across Western Europe, we find these words: "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend." Today, we look back at these brave soldiers and say thank you. Thank you for our many freedoms. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for fighting for us. And thank you for your great service. Hear, hear. May we always, always honor their sacrifice, lest we ever forget. Thank you.
The Leader of the PC Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor for me today to rise on behalf of the Progressive Conservative Caucus to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It's so great to see the men and women in uniform here, half of which I'm honored to call a personal friend. On April 9th, 1917, the Canadian Corps, led by an attack on the German army in the Nord-Pas-de-Calais region of France in World War I. It was a battle that lasted for 3 days, but saw all 4 divisions of the Canadian Expeditionary Force victorious. In this battle, these brave soldiers displayed characteristics that Canada is now known for across the globe: commitment, determination, pride, and bravery. 4 members of the Canadian Corps also received Victoria Crosses, including Private John George Pattison of the 50th Battalion from Calgary. But this victory came with a heavy price. In the Battle of Vimy Ridge, nearly 3,600 Canadians lost their lives and over 7,000 were wounded. We remember the brave Canadians who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy today, and we will thank them for their ultimate sacrifice, and we will never forget. Mr. Speaker, we are joined here today by a number of veterans and active members of our Canadian Armed Forces. They represent the Army units from across Alberta that fought at Vimy Ridge 100 years ago. To the brave Canadian men and women defending our freedom, we are forever indebted to you. Your commitment to keeping the true north strong and free is an inspiration to us all. 100 years later, you continue to carry on the legacy of Vimy Ridge as you tirelessly defend our peace and freedom. As author Larry Worthington wrote in Amid the Guns Below, the Battle of Vimy Ridge was a moment in Canadian history that we will always be proud of. A national spirit was born. And now to be British was not enough. We were Canadian and could do a good job of paddling our own canoe. Our country was born. As I look up to the gallery today to see our armed forces, I can only say thank you
for the great paddling you continue to do.
today on all our behalf. These words remain true today. May God bless you.
And all of those that serve so bravely before you.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On this day, 100 years ago, a great battle of triumph and tragedy was raging on Vimy Ridge. I'm honored today to rise in this democratically elected assembly to be able to speak freely about these brave men and women, about the survivors, their families, and pay tribute to the fallen. Indeed, this is one of the gifts these courageous warriors gave to all of us, not just freedom from oppression and tyranny, but the freedom to exercise our rights of self-determination and recognition of our inalienable human rights. The price they paid was high. An entire generation lost. Vimy Ridge remains the single bloodiest battle Canadians fought, with about 3,600 lives being laid down in the fields of France. It was a defining moment, both in terms of the Great War, as well as the birthing of this great nation, Canada. It fills us with pride to remember the victory that was wrought on Vimy Ridge. It also reminds us of the preciousness of life, the duty of public service, the eternal vigilance required to protect our rights and freedoms, and the rule of law. Finally, I'd be amiss if I did not speak about the unspeakable horror of war and the need for each of us to work always and everywhere to create the conditions for peace. The average age of Canadian soldiers in World War I was 26, the oldest 80, the youngest reported 10 years old. What they were to experience in those fields was unimaginable for these young minds. While many lives were lost on Vimy, many more were forever changed. Those who did not die had been surrounded by death and terror on a daily basis, unrelenting physical, emotional, and spiritual trauma. When they returned home, they were enthusiastically welcomed by a truly grateful nation. But how could anyone who had not been there and experienced the devastation begin to understand the effect it would have on the survivors and their families? This was a time when knowledge of mental health, and particularly the lasting impacts of trauma, was in its infancy. To be a man often meant then, and still means, maintaining a bravado of strength, refusing to ask for help, and suffering in silence. Many, if not all, of those returning from the battlefield agonized under the torment of post-traumatic illness. Too often this led to mental illness, alcoholism, drug abuse, and family violence. Although the guns had gone quiet, there was still a war raging in their minds, reverberating through intimate family members, and a different peace that remained to be won. Our understanding of this disorder has come a long way since, but there are many hills we have to climb yet together. More needs to be done to support our brave servicemen, women, and families who faced and are facing today the devastations of war. We need to end the stigma and make it clear that admitting mental illness does not make us weak. In fact, it takes great strength and bravery. Bravery comes in many forms. Let us earnestly then work in this House and in our communities to preserve the peace through respectful discourse, reducing inequality, and justice for all, remembering the peace that was purchased at such a high price. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Elbow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First World War veteran Reginald Roy said, "I became a Canadian on Vimy Ridge. We became a nation there in the eyes of the world. It cut across French and English, rich and poor, urban and rural. Vimy Ridge confirmed that we were as good as, if not better than, any European power." Attacking together for the first time, 4 Canadian divisions stormed the ridge at 5:30 a.m. on April 9, 1917, and fought for 3 days until they were victorious. The Canadian success at Vimy Ridge was a result of meticulous planning and rehearsals behind our own lines, including digging tunnels through no man's land into German territory. It was only recently, in 2001, that stone carvings made by Canadians awaiting orders to commence the Vimy attack were discovered in these tunnels. They range from elaborately carved regimental banners bearing names like the Canadian Scottish, 15th Battalion, the 48th Highlanders, to the names of soldiers, their wives, mothers, or girlfriends, or in true Canadian style, even a tongue-in-cheek mailbox for mail bound from France to Toronto, Canada. Now, this reminds us of the humanity of the people who served in the Canadian Armed Forces at Vimy Ridge. People like Private Joseph Goldie Fairholm, an Edmonton soldier whose diary includes details of the preparations for Vimy and of the battle's legacy. He wrote, "In the vacant space behind, we rehearsed the whole detail of our now famous victory at Vimy Ridge. Even in the days after that battle, it appears that the soldiers already knew the place it would hold in history. It was the preparation, military innovations, and disciplined execution of the Vimy battle plan that earned Canada the reputation for being a tenacious and trustworthy ally. We became a nation in the eyes of the world rather than simply a colony of Britain. But we know this victory came at a heavy cost. 3,598 Canadians were killed and another 7,000 were wounded. One of the Albertans to take part was Métis sharpshooter Henry Norwest from Fort Saskatchewan, who joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force in January 1915 and eventually fought with Calgary's 50th Battalion. He was awarded a medal for his efforts to help Allied forces capture a significant point along Vimy Ridge. In his award citations, officials said he showed great bravery and saved a great many men's lives. But just 3 months before the end of the First World War, Norwest himself became the target of a German sharpshooter, and the 33-year-old was killed in the Battle of Amiens. On his temporary grave marker, one of his fellow soldiers wrote, "It must have been a damn good sniper that got Norwest." And it was only very recently, in 2008, that the name Henry Norwest was added to the cenotaph at the Fort Saskatchewan Legion. As we commemorate the great Canadians who helped secure victory at Vimy Ridge, I think of the Canadian men and women who serve our country today. They walk in the footsteps of the thousands of soldiers who have gone before them and honor our country every day with their bravery. Thank you.
Well done.
The honourable member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about the incredible sacrifice made 100 years ago at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. As the Government of Alberta's liaison to the Canadian Armed Forces, I have had the privilege of meeting and speaking with our guests in the gallery, as well as many more members of Canadian Forces and their families at commemorations across our province. On April 9, 1917, our brave Canadian soldiers began the infamous creeping barrage at 5:30 a.m. Over 3,598 Canadian soldiers were killed and 7,004 wounded in this historic battle. The Vimy Ridge Monument was erected in 1936 to commemorate Canada's fallen sons and the sacrifice so many made for the freedom on those fields in France. There are 20 symbolic statues on the monument, but one in particular stood out to me. It was a statue of Canada Bereft, or as many commonly know her, Mother Canada. She is symbolic of the spirit of Canada weeping for her fallen sons. Many of you were here in the House when I introduced my eldest son last week. He is the same age as so many who died fighting for Canada at Vimy Ridge. As a mother, I am awestruck by the strength of so many Canadian mothers and fathers who said goodbye to their sons, not knowing if they would ever see them again. I can't even begin to fathom the sense of loss and grief that so many mothers, fathers, spouses, and children must have endured after this historic battle. Yesterday, I was proud to be part of a declaration by the Government of Alberta that recognized April 9, 2017 as the Battle of Vimy Ridge Day here in Alberta. This declaration cannot bring back the fallen, but this recognition and the other commemoration around the province and the world can demonstrate in a small way our gratitude and the honor in which we hold all who fought and still fight for our freedom. To all Canadians who sacrificed that day, to their families and loved ones, and to those who continue to protect our rights and freedoms, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.